It's a pretty dire future, and a lot of people are looking and trying to understand the stop and go, the exit strategy for a Fed that finds itself in a bad situation. Diane Swonk also here on deck, chief economist at KPMG. Diane, what do you think of what Mohammed was just talking about in terms of there are no real good options and they're facing potentially curtailing an economy, lagging behind weakening data at a time when they still have to fight inflation?
Well, I think I know Mohammed well, and I think the world of him, and I agree with them that the Fed is now between, or the economy and the Fed, having been a part of that, is now between the proverbial rock and a hard place. There's no way to extricate ourselves without there being some pain, and I think that's very important. I think the Fed understands that, and their focus is now in restoring their inflation-fighting credibility, and their focus is squarely on inflation. They're no longer resting on the laurels of the supply side coming up to meet demand. Instead, they're hammering demand to bring down to a supply-constrained world, and what I think that means is one of the outcomes that Mohammed talks about is higher unemployment and, in fact, a recession. The problem is, and I agree with Mohammed on this, the Fed can't calibrate. They don't have the precision to calibrate the next recession. They can't just say it's going to be a mild recession and all is done. And their worst nightmare is hitting that tripwire we've talked about before that Mohammed also alluded to, and that is, the ultra-low rate environment of many years embedded a lot of sins in the global economy and in debt. Overall, raising rates reveals those sins, and in doing so, you could hit a tripwire that triggers a credit market crisis and a much deeper recession that is harder to extract yourself out of, or the Fed has to intervene before it's really beaten down and derailed what is a more entrenched inflation. And that's a very different situation than they had in the early 1980s when Paul Volcker broke the back of inflation. And here they are trying to not repeat the mistakes of the 1970s, but in a much more complex context of a more connected global environment.